Hey, this is Jeff Nyquist, and here's another edition of Friends and Enemies. We're going to have a rather interesting discussion today about Carl Jung and then, of course, Jordan Peterson, who was influenced by Jung, and about the political, I guess you could say, the political significance of Jung, the philosophical and the moral significance in the end. And of course, I've got in this book, Aryan Christ, and maybe for 2 weeks we're going to talk about Richard Knoll's book about Jung, which is important. He also wrote The Jung Cult. And there's a lot of things we can talk about and learn about what, these occult influences and mystery cults. And so I should say something about Richard Knoll, who wrote this. He's taught at Harvard and MIT. But he got his PhD in clinical psychology from the New School of Social Research. So Noel, although I think the book is rather excellent, and I've read criticisms of it, and the criticisms are interesting too, but he's very much, I think, a man of the left. And so it's very intriguing when you have the occult, religion, the left, the right, and you've got science, and you've got the question of the soul and human nature and the future of humanity all coming together in one place. Um, with me is Alex Benesch in Germany. I'm in the U.S. So, Alex, you've been reading this material. What do you think of Noel's coverage of Carl Jung?
I think the analysis by Richard Knoll is accurate. However, Knoll is not looking at the entire life of Carl Gustav Jung. He's only looking at the early Carl Jung, and he also does not apply the same level of scrutiny when it comes to icons of the left. So this is something that I see quite a bit, especially in the last few years when we had the explosion or the next level of traditional conspiracy media, the new right wing, and all that. So the bigger this conspiracy movement got, the more you saw these left wing or sort of left wing social scientists, shrinks, psychologists. So they try to counter that right wing movement. And usually, when you see some of this analysis from the left, it's somewhat accurate, but they never, ever apply the same level of scrutiny when it comes to their own side and their own icons. And so I think people should keep that in mind. It's like targeting. It's almost like warfare, really. It's almost like in warfare, you attack the enemy where he is weak. You find a spot where the enemy is weak, and that's where you concentrate your forces. You do not attack where the enemy is strong. And I think that's sort of the underlying strategy of Richard Knoll, because all this stuff that he has to say about Carl Gustav Jung, all this stuff, you could apply the same method to, let's say, Karl Marx or many of Marx's contemporaries. People who got into the occult, maybe even more so than Jung, or into more dangerous types of cults than Jung was a part of. And also, real life communism, actual real life communism was created as a cult movement. Anything about it is a cult movement. Karl Marx is viewed as sort of the prophet, in this communist cult. Marx is sort of the prophet. Lenin is the revolutionary messiah figure to some degree. That's Lenin. And so anything communist is holy. It's sacred to the left. And so they defended these ideas like the Inquisition. So they wanted to just destroy anybody who was voicing doubt, anybody who was raining on their parade, right? So and you had to pretend to love communism. I mean, you can see that still in North Korea. When the dictator dies, everybody has to cry. I mean, it's you're obligated to cry, and if you don't cry in front of a camera, you're in trouble. And same thing when the government tells you to be happy, you have to clap like you're an idiot and smile a lot. Why just selective targets? Okay, so I think Knoll's study is important, but it is incomplete, and so we're trying to figure out in this show what is valuable information, what is valuable criticism, and we're trying to fill in the blank spots. And also we want to create sort of the segue into the modern era with people like Jordan Peterson. Now, Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
he's strongly influenced by Carl Gustav Jung, and I think he shares some of the same shortcomings. Even though it's more forgivable when we talk about the shortcomings of Jung because he lived, from 1875 to 1961. Whereas Jordan Peterson has access to modern research on organized evil. Just there's so much new stuff, but still Peterson seems to think we can solve evil, we can solve all the problems by just applying some old Jungian concepts and just I call it warmed over Freemasonry. That to me is the philosophy of Jordan Peterson. We're just using stories and allegories, and we want to create the hero's journey. We improve man with these stories so he becomes a hero and does good things. That sounds exactly like Freemasonry to me. And I don't think we
Okay,
can.
let's talk a little bit about what Jung's work was, and about his background, a little bit about his biography. He was born in 1875, and his grandfather had known Goethe. His grandfather was from Germany, but because one of his grandfather's friends had assassinated a government official, his grandfather wasn't wanted in Germany. He bounced to Paris. His grandfather was a physician, by the way, like him, also named Carl Gustav Jung, but he was Carl with a K. And his grandfather ended up in Switzerland, and of course that's where Carl Jung was born. But what Knoll makes a big deal out of is that Carl Jung was proud of his German grandfather and his German background and ancestors. And of course, he ties this into Carl Jung's early dalliance with the Third Reich, with the Nazis, which he turned against, to Jung's credit. But it's very important because I think overall, Jung ends up being, if you look at the totality of his work, he ends up becoming a conservative voice of warning about man moving away from religion and religious traditions, which is something that someone like Knoll, who is on the far left, I think, doesn't really like. Because what's interesting is Knoll, who's written these two books trying to destroy Jung's reputation, Knoll has been in parapsychology labs. He's studied the occult. He went to China and Mongolia to study shamans, right? So it's not like Knoll is against the left's dalliances with the occult. He's just against a conservative figure who has this incredible reputation, which was Jung. And of course, Jordan Peterson is considered to be on the right too, but of course is pro-Russian for some reason, as you're pointing out, and is okay with Ukraine being crushed. And here is where you get to Jung. Jung in his later life was all about talking about evil and about the dangers of nuclear war. And there's a sense of guilt in Jung and telling people, try to believe in Jesus, try to go back to church, telling them this in his later years. Knoll wants to depict this as hypocrisy. I don't think it is. And you see, the thing is that whatever a person believes privately, and I don't think Jung was a Christian, what he said publicly, what he was trying to teach people was his serious work, he was trying to influence people to do something, and he had reasons for it. And I think you can find the same thing in Peterson. But whereas Jung collaborated with the OSS against Hitler in the end, and came to realize that communism, Jung said communism is a concentrated antichrist force in history, is what Jung said in his book Aeon. He talked about communism and antichrist together. These are unforgivable things for Jung to have done to the left.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely unforgivable, and to tell people to go back to church. When you go to if you want to understand the beginning of Jung's career, Jung was absolutely obsessed with knowing whether the soul survives death when he was young. And that now explaining Jung's grandfather converted from Catholicism to Protestantism. So his father was a Protestant minister, Jung's father. And his maternal grandfather was not only a Protestant minister, but there in Basel, Switzerland, was the dean of the Protestant ministers in Basel, Switzerland. But this is so weird. How do you explain it? That maternal grandfather, who was the number one pastor in that community in Switzerland, talked to dead people,
Mm-hmm.
conducted seances, was into spiritism or spiritualism, whatever, and including which caused his mother and his aunts and his cousins, all kinds of folks. And there was, Jung would say, there was some talent there that they actually had experiences, right, with this phenomenon, which furthered Jung's obsession. So when people say Jung read Kant and Jung read um, Schopenhauer, he wasn't really interested in their metaphysics or their philosophy. He was interested in their writings. Each of them wrote books on I think Schopenhauer's book was Essay on Spirit Seers, and there was a similar title by Kant. I can't remember, but that's what Jung was interested in. And aside from his medical work, working to be a doctor and become a psychologist, he read everything he could on touching on the soul and survival, and I guess you could say the occult.
Yeah.
This was Jung's obsession when he was young, was with these experiences. So, and I may be wrong, this may be different than Peterson, because Peterson strikes me, although he's interested in this, Peterson strikes me as now Jung was trained as an empirical scientist, and his official work, he did it all as empirical science, and I think he did good work because I've read a lot of it, and it sounds sound, psychologically sound. But his Jung said, I am a metaphysical dualist. I believe in the spirit world, or the world of, a God, where God and the spirits and whatever is there, and I believe in the physical world. I'm not sure Peterson has that. I think Peterson is a materialist. I'm not sure that he believes in any religion, really. I think he sees it as, and you talk about,
A
it was
tool.
interesting what you said about Peterson soft pedaling a kind of diffuse Freemasonry,
Yeah.
right? I think there's something to that. Whereas Jung was reaching beyond that and had an actual journey. Jordan Peterson got addicted to opiates, ended up in Russia, being treated in Russia for those opiates, ended
Mm,
up being flacking for Russia in his political statements.
yeah. I mean, to me, I mean, people have to realize when British Freemasonry started, right? This was in 1717, so just like 3 years after the new king, King George I from Hanover, who actually came from Germany or parts of Germany and spoke German. So this was the big shift in Britain. So you had a new leadership, and that lasted for a long time, and then the relatives then continued on until this very day. And so this new era, okay, the new leadership in Britain, and they also had a scientific organization restarted. They call it the Royal Society, and so the Royal Society for Science and British Freemasonry are actually sister organizations. Many people don't know that, and even some of the core early statutes of Freemasonry have a strong emphasis on science. Now, um, so
And Isaac Newton was into this stuff. He was
oh
into
yeah, yeah. I
astrology
mean,
and
the
numerology.
the Royal Society existed earlier with the old British leadership, and back in the old days, the Royal Society was full of Rosicrucians, so they were just completely into the occult. And so
And
at a later
by
stage,
the way, we might kind of maybe try to describe where Rosicrucian, what it is, and where it came from. And I read a book last week which stunned me because I didn't know this. This is a person who knows Jacques Vallée personally. That J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée, the Project Blue Book scientists, from the 1960s were privately Rosicrucians. They not belonging to any group, but believed in that philosophy.
Yeah.
And that's why Hynek called his group the Invisible College, because um, that's an old phrase from the Rosicrucians. But I should just tell people, where does Rosicrucianism come from? It comes from the middle of the 1600s. There were a couple pamphlets popped up saying there were these people that had these special insights and powers and whatever.
Mr.
And so,
Rosenkreuz.
yes,
Mr.
the
Rosenkreuz.
mysterious Mr. Rosenkreuz, Herr Rosenkreuz. But was he a real person? Did any of this exist? But people started spontaneously, it seems, creating these groups. These that is it. The suggestion of it existing brought it into existence. That people started creating these groups,
Yeah.
and of course there had been since the fall of Byzantium. When manuscripts from the old library at Alexandria that had been moved to Byzantium, when Byzantium fell, these things came flooding into Italy. So you had Hermetic writings, you had Platonism, Plotinus, you had these writings coming to Florence, where the Medici family was translating, having everything translated. And in fact, they put a stop to everything when they got the Hermetic writings, because these were purportedly from ancient Egypt. They were the oldest supposed wisdom from Thoth, Hermes, the thrice great. Um, and so this started, and there were also some manuscripts that ended up in Spain as well. Some things so there was both coming out of Spain and coming out of the Jews in Spain, because they were the ones that were bringing this out of the Muslim world, because the Muslims have plundered all these ancient, Babylon was in the Muslim world after all. These were pouring out, and so you had these heretical thoughts in the West, in the Christian West, and you had this dabbling in mysticism in the occult that started. And so by the time you get to the 1600s, there's a kind of this explosion. And of course, you have you have Rosicrucian lodges spontaneously forming out of who knows. And then you have at the same time, and I think they're grabbing onto these Hermetic, they're reading Plotinus, and so on. And then you have, of course, Freemasonry emerging out of this. Just to give people the
Yeah.
background on where this
So
came from.
so it's almost like they try to separate these two things for organizational purposes. So instead of having a scientific organization, the Royal Society, being engaged in Rosicrucianism, they just wanted to have just for better organization. They started British Freemasonry and also the new renewed Royal Society for Science, and so that new organization and the new leadership that made Britain ultimately, over the span of almost 100 years, that made Britain the most successful empire in the world. They were shooting
And
past.
Britain
Yeah,
Britain was a kind of an empire that they took scientific ideas from everybody. It's like Sweden invented
yeah,
modern scientific bureaucracy, and it went to Holland, and it affected the efficiency of commerce and government, and the British just adopted it, and it just made them a superpower overnight.
yeah,
And this
and
was in the 18th
yeah,
century.
because when
So Britain was taking in all these
yeah.
ideas, both good and bad.
Yeah, so when King George the First started, Britain in many ways was behind France. France had more space, France had more people, this and that. But 100 years later, the situation had changed completely, and at some point, Britain became this behemoth of an empire, and so
In the
uh,
7 years, what we call the French and Indian War here in America,
seven
but you
years war.
guys call the 7 Years' War.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this was a war that was fought on all over the world.
it was a
And
world war. It was really
yeah,
the first world war.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
and
massive
and
thing. It
and
was massive.
people don't realize the British captured the Philippines, captured Cuba, destroyed the Spanish treasure fleet during this war. They crushed the French Navy. They took India from France. They took Canada from France. You talk about all fighting all over the world. It really was.
Yeah,
And then, of course, the Prussian king, Frederick the Great, was the main only ally the British had. The British were defeating everybody at sea, but on land, it was Frederick the Great was holding off Austria and Russia and France, right? He said he was surrounded by three women.
yeah,
You know, the Elizabeth, the Russian Empress, Maria Theresa of Austria, and of course Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of King Henry the 15th. I mean King
Yeah.
Louis the 15th. But yeah, so this was a tremendous war. That it actually was the war that made the
Yeah.
British Empire.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
it seems very paradoxical. Okay, so when so Freemasonry, well, let's talk about British Freemasonry. When they describe themselves, they will tell you that they will take a man which is just not perfect yet, or is not ready yet to do good in this world, to do special things, and they take this man and they improve him, they bring him up to standard, and they're doing this by using allegories and these old stories, these archetype stories about heroism. So, for example, they will tell an old story about somebody who had the secrets of the temple secrets, and these three ruffians, they threaten him and they want the secret out of him, and he refuses to hand over the secret, and then they kill him. So by telling these ancient stories, really, opening the gate to the ancient world, by doing so, they will create better men who will do moral things. They always talk about morals and morals and morals. So the first paradoxical thing, of course, is the British Empire and how it conducted itself, because it was a very traditional empire in many ways. It was using force, it was using trade, it was using every intelligence, it was using every tool it had.
And this is where the people like the Irish and the French and those who were the enemies of Britain came up with this phrase, perfidious Albion. Albion is just another word for the British. Perfidious Albion. That the British are gonna, or as the Indians would say in North America, white man speak with forked tongue.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
the
it's like
Indians liked the French; they didn't like the British.
yeah. So it seems paradoxical when this new version of the British Empire through Freemasonry was talking about morals, yet the empire behaved the way it did in colonies such as India, and there's some interesting studies on that. I think it was the last one I read was Shashi Tharoor's What the British Did to India. So that's paradoxical, of course, but at the same time, without science, if you really understand history, without modern science, it was almost not affordable to have institutionalized, codified morals, because every empire in the past was so fragile. They were afraid, because so many empires came and went, they feared if they give people more liberty, if they give people more prosperity, if they let people participate in the political process, this could lead to instability, and then you get taken over by a traditional evil empire. So one could argue that it needed modern science for food production and other production to give us a better chance than ever before of having institutionalized morals, or just professional advanced morals in the way we live. So the science gave us a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of dangers. So it's like this triple, quadruple paradox when we look at the British Empire. And so, yeah, so you got to be really careful when it comes to these mystery school influences, because no mystery cults are not always the same. When you look at ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and some other significant empires in the ancient world, there were so many of these cults, and some of them were not really that dangerous. Okay, so as far as archaeologists and some other experts can tell us, they were experimenting with psychedelic drugs. They used other methods to achieve altered states of mind. They were trying to come up with something new, and they were experimenting also with baseline morals in society. What is adequate, what is not adequate, and they were just experimenting a lot. So some of these mystery
What
cults.
is interesting about the ancient world and about Carl Jung is Carl Jung wanted to know whether the soul survived death when he was young. He was obsessed with this. He also, because his grandfather spoke to dead people, he also wanted to understand um, this idea of communicating with
The dead.
other non-human
Yeah.
beings, right? And the dead. And of course, this was his father died when he was fairly young. And you had more people dying in families in those days. And of course, people were very worried. I mean, they had some of the people they loved the most were dead. And they wanted to believe that they were going to be reunited with them. And the ancient world is the same thing. All of the ancient world was abuzz at one time with talk about, are the angels good or bad? You know, and the
Yeah.
word angel means messenger. So that much of ancient paganism was based on techniques for not only divination, but techniques for communicating with, you know, what we would call demons. The ancient Greeks would call them daimons, right? The demonic, they believed in a demonic reality full of gods and non-human intelligences
Yeah.
that humanity had to somehow get along with. And so this was both in the Egyptian, the Roman, the Babylonian, and the Greek religions, the
Yeah.
polytheistic religions.
So not
Yeah,
all. So not all of these ancient mystery cults were psychopathic, and not all of them did sadistic,
those
crazy,
those some were.
crazy rituals. Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we do have archaeological evidence, and some pretty interesting information about some of these older empires in the Americas, for example, like where Mexico now is, and further to the
Oh
south,
yes, the
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 skull
great
towers.
Moloch that they were feeding there by
Yeah,
sacrificing
so
victims
they
and
were
ripping their
cutting
hearts out when they were
cutting
still beating.
people's
Yeah,
cutting people's hearts out in front of a crowd. This was not done in secret. It's not like people think of the Illuminati in more modern times, doing this in a secret basement in a castle somewhere. This was in public. This was in front of a crowd, cutting people's hearts out. And also, we have these skull towers. So people dug out these gigantic towers made of human skulls from people that were sacrificed, and cement. So you could actually make a huge tower out of these human remains. And also
which
modern
which was the this was the Aztecs, and there's a movie Mel Gibson made called Apocalypto,
apocalypto, yeah.
where he shows this, and it's rather people got offended by this movie, but he shows. And one of the scenes in the movie, of course, is these Indians are being hunted as sacrificial victims by the Aztecs. And this one kid is being chased down a beach, and you see the Spanish conquistadors
Yeah,
arriving, and you think, see, we're trained to believe those conquistadors were evil, but you're seeing those
yeah.
conquistadors arriving, and you're going, oh, thank goodness they've arrived,
Um,
because these people are just being
yeah. So
slaughtered by this
and
ritual
also
sacrifice massacre.
and also nowadays we know about psychopaths. We know about the inability to have empathy. Some people are wired in a way that they derive pleasure from the misery and the suffering of innocent people. It's exciting to them, and if you wrap it into a religious context, there you have a satanic, or what you could call a satanic ritual, a psychopathic ritual. We know psychopaths exist now. We know how their brains are, and we know the genetics of it that play like a significant part of that. Yeah, so people have to take this very, very seriously. And also this Richard Knoll guy that we were talking about, and I have notes about Richard Knoll's analysis on Jung. So Knoll is trashing Jung for getting into a soft version of the mystery cults. Um, and then we saw Knoll criticizing American psychiatry during the satanic panic of the 1980s and 90s. And I've studied this area this time as well, so maybe I can talk about that later. So you have to take it seriously. There are psychopaths, and there always were psychopaths, and they would be interested in having human sacrifice, some very, very evil psychopathic rituals. So you have to take this seriously. This is not just a myth, but also you cannot associate any mystery cult with this psychopathic activity. It's just not history. So what I think Carl Gustav Jung got into was, I think he got into a soft version of these Greek and some Roman mystery cults, like the Mithras cult, and so this is something that can be very, very different to compare to what the Nazis were into, their brand of occultism, and also the brand of occultism that we've talked about in the previous show, which is the Russian occultism with Alexander Dugin, and Dugin took stuff from the Nazi occultism, so they feed off of each other.
Crowleyism, the human sacrifice, the Crowleyism. Just to show it isn't just archaeological evidence we have about really dangerous mystery cults. This is Livy, Titus Livy. They published this Penguin Classics, Livy, Rome, and the Mediterranean, but it's actually in book 29 of the surviving books of Titus Livy. He's a Roman historian who lived at the time of Christ. It's part 8 of book 29, and he writes about this trouble that came from Greece to Rome. And he says the trouble started with the arrival in Etruria of a Greek of humble origin. And this guy wasn't really educated. He dealt in sacrifices and soothsaying. But his method of infecting people's minds with error was not by the open practice of his rites and public advertisements of his trade and his system. He was the hierophant of secret ceremonies performed at night. There were initiations which at first were imparted only to a few, but they soon began to be widespread among men and women. The pleasures of drinking and feasting were added to the religious rites to attract a large number of followers. When wine had inflamed their feelings, and night and the mingling of the sexes and of different ages had extinguished all power of moral judgment, all sorts of corruption began to be practiced, since each person had ready to hand the chance of gratifying the particular desire to which he was naturally inclined. This, by the way, when is this happening? This is in the early 2nd century BC, that this part of Roman history. So this was happening after the Second Punic War, after the defeat of Hannibal, when Rome was a very moral society. It was pagan, but they had a high degree of conscientiousness. This came from Greece to them. And they had a problem. They were afraid this was going to wipe them out. And they had a real struggle with this, as Livy tells the story. It's a fascinating story. And so the idea that these things, they can't be benign, but they can be extremely dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I have this quote here. It says that it's about this idea that we all can access these ancient archetype stories, and that will empower us. It says here, in his first published theory about this specific topic in 1911, Jung introduces the idea that his phylogenetic layer contains the mythological images and thinking of pagan antiquity. Therefore, when Jung's use of language is analyzed to reveal his intent, it is a decidedly pre-Christian layer that has been covered up by centuries of Judeo-Christian sediment. Jung advocates deliberately cutting through centuries of strangling Judeo-Christian underbrush to reach the promised land of the impersonal psyche, a pre-Christian pagan land of the dead, and to thereby be revitalized. And to prove his theory of a collective unconscious, this is the same stuff that Jordan Peterson talks about. To prove his theory, Jung cited the recurring independent appearances of the same archetypes in mythological traditions and in the delusions of his psychiatric patients, particularly one patient known as the solar phallus man, whose hallucination of a phallic sun paralleled a vision described in the ancient Mithraic liturgy. However, Knoll delivers a severe blow to these claims. First, he points out that the patients in the hospital where Jung conducted his research had ample opportunities to learn about ancient mythology. Next, he documents that the solar phallus man, this weird patient, could indeed have had access to information about the Mithraic liturgy, and that in order to conceal this fact, Jung deliberately misrepresented several important details. surrounding the case. So it seems to be like Jung wanted this to be true. He wanted to have found the key to understanding everything and to fix everything. And so it seems like it's the same thing that I see in Jordan Peterson, and he has been criticized for his first book about the very same point. Peterson makes this argument, which is the same argument that Jung had provided, that everywhere in the world, all these cultures, they had the same stories. They had these same archetype stories, but there are actually significant differences. So it's not the same everywhere. Peterson is looking at those examples that fit his argument.
Yeah, and
right?
if you go to Mexico, you got mass human sacrifice.
Yeah.
I should correct myself. When I said that this can be harmless, what I mean is that there could be people that can have some silly beliefs, right? That they don't act on them. Nothing really comes of these beliefs. They can be interested in some mythology of some tribe somewhere, and it doesn't involve them in ritual human sacrifice or destroying their own or other people's lives. But I think that the problem is that there is real objective evil, and I think that's what Jung came to understand. And Jordan Peterson talks about evil too, but he doesn't seem to understand yet because of his willingness to see a whole nation be crushed by Russia. I think that's not acceptable as a good thing. You can't be for the extermination of innocent people, the sacrificing of innocent people for your own comfort and safety. That can't be right. But yeah, it's Jung's influence as a psychiatrist. He was very guarded about letting other people know about his interest in the occult and talking to the dead. I mean, this is stuff that didn't generally get out. He kept it in his own family circle and the people around him, and they have been very protective of him. And it was actually, by the way, it was actually because of Knoll. I read in some of the literature about this that Jung's red books, his diaries that were written before 1927, I believe, about his occult experiences, his dreams, his visions, these precognitive dreams that he had, were published in answer to Knoll's criticism, because they wanted to present it. And of course, Knoll later, I think, has said that they sanitized it. I don't know if that's true or not, but I haven't finished reading this book yet. But it's very interesting to me that that in this particular mix, we have, remember that it was Nietzsche and others in the night, and arguably Hegel, according to Eric Voegelin, Hegel they were basically destroyers of Christianity.
Yeah.
Because it was Nietzsche that said his God is dead and you have killed him, but it was Hegel who said we're going to have Christianity, and basically it's not going to be Christian.
And also, I mean, ultimately, why was Lenin buried in a mausoleum, which was a direct copy of an ancient temple, right? So it's not a
pyramid. It's actually a pyramid.
It's not as if Jung was the only person who was fascinated with the ancient world, and also a broader movement, and I have this in the notes here, a broader movement in Germany and Switzerland for a while.
Right.
Because you have to imagine if you lived at that time in Germany, right? So nobody knows what direction to try out. Should you have a full monarchy? Should you have a half monarchy like the British, or should you try a full republic like America? Should you have religion? Should you not have religion? Should you revive the ancient traditions or leave the ancient traditions? These were the questions on people's minds, and of course the National Socialists, they had access to early psychology, so they could target their propaganda, they could tailor their propaganda to tell people, different segments of the population, what they wanted to hear. And so when you the Nazis presented themselves as a Roman movement, and you can see that. I mean, just around the corner here, you can see the big place where they had the rallies, very Roman architecture and structure and all the design. Then you have this big temple. This is in Nuremberg also. It's almost a copy of the Italian Roman temple of Emperor Augustus. So they copied the Augustus temple and made one in Nuremberg. So they marketed themselves as Roman because that's what people knew. That was what people were familiar with. Over the centuries, all these empires here, the British, the French, Germans, Austrians, they all wanted to be the next Rome.
But there's something additional. There's something, you see, the thing that's really troubling about Hitler is he was more sophisticated than that even. If you really look at what Hitler was doing, more sophisticated than his writings or his book, Mein Kampf, and his secret second book, Hitler was an artist. He was interested in culture and how culture is upstream from politics. He was not at all oblivious to this. So that art so therefore the Nazis were trying to reshape the entire culture. And of course the SS, what a lot of people don't know about the SS, which was headed by Heinrich Himmler, was that it had this enormous cultural mission. The SS originally started as a bunch of research bureaus and think tanks and groups of researchers, and they got all these academics and aristocrats into the SS. People who had refined concepts. And this is one of the things that Julius Evola, that Dugin is so interested in. Evola got interested in the SS and said, look, this is a new elite this is the new aristocracy maybe for all of Europe, for a united Europe. And they've got this sophistication. Of course, the SS looked at Evola and said, we're suspicious of him, because they wanted to be the designers of a culture. And that they wanted to think everything through. That is, rather than having an organic culture that just sort of developed spontaneously, they wanted to actually construct one from the ground up. And Hitler had this vision. And of course, this kind of construction involves killing a lot of people and erasing and falsifying a lot of things. And it's very much, the Soviets were doing the same thing in the Soviet Union on a massive scale. They were eradicating, it's like I mentioned, all the Ukrainian folk singers and poets were rounded up, just a few that escaped, and they wanted to eradicate and destroy them all. Talk about this Putin claiming the Soviets were wanting to preserve Ukrainian culture. No, they wanted to make a Soviet new man. The Nazis were also making their Aryan Superman. So these very dangerous experiments in which they're using all of social science and all of the understandings, and by the way, as you pointed out, but the occult is underlying in both. There's occultists working in the background behind the far left and the far right. And their ideas are not that much different.
The concept of the mechanisms of a dangerous mystery cult that can be applied to any country at any time, at any point in history. I mean, you had mystery cults surviving in the Muslim world, or you had the Young Turk lodges destroying the caliphate. You can apply this to almost any target group, right? And I have something here. This is from Knoll's analysis on Jung, where he gives sort of the background, which I was alluding to. How far-reaching the outright love was for the Roman Empire in ancient Greece. I mean, in the higher schools, universities, this was everywhere. Now, of course, when Knoll talks about it, it sounds like Knoll is complaining about elitism. He's just lumping it all together. If you think you can do something better, then that's dangerous, even though that's essential to progress, right? If you have a healthy competition, people wanting to excel. healthy hierarchies, and also real life communism needed hierarchies as well, and they also were very selective about the persons they would promote. So it says this. A third relevant but often understated aspect of Jung's early years is the dominance of classical Greco-Roman culture in the educational philosophy and in the schools of German Europe of this era. So, for example, one of the important people prolonging this trend was Johann Joachim Winckelmann. Goethe called it Winckelmanns heroic Gewahrwerden der griechischen Kunst, his finding of Greek art. That's actually not a wholly correct translation, by the way. Gewahrwerden. I mean, it's like the German language can sometimes be very imprecise. Certain terms. That's why Karl Marx used certain woozy terms, because it sounds almost hidden and magical. The image of ancient Greece as an idyllic, serene, rational golden age of truth and beauty, painted by Winckelmann in his works, dominated German culture until the end of the 19th century. Ancient Greece, in this depiction, was pure, never vulgar, the birthplace of genius, not degeneracy, and therefore it became an ideal that German culture sought to emulate. Now, of course, you cannot blame somebody for this type of optimistic or unrealistic view of history. Okay, you cannot blame somebody for dreaming about a future that is healthy and all these geniuses running around. You can't blame people for that, and it's almost as if Knoll is using a classic Marxist-Leninist framing. So the moment you are interested in your ancestors, nation states, or traditions, the moment you get into that stuff, it can only lead to evil. It doesn't necessarily lead to evil. It did in the case of the Nazis, but that was due to a lot of other factors.
I should point this out that in the ancient world, Greece and Rome and ancient Egypt were profoundly conservative societies. They were societies that, among their basic beliefs, is that man had this tendency to degenerate. And of course, the idea of man as a sinful creature, as a fallen creature, really is found in the ancient pagan world. It's found in ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt. That human nature has corruption in it. And of course, they had the belief there was a golden age. There was a time before, long years ago, where man was better, but man had degenerated from that time. So they saw everything as they didn't believe in progress like we do. And now you see one of the problems with modernity is this: we're profoundly not like the ancients in that we're not conservative. We don't conserve. We look forward to the future thinking, oh, things are going to get better. Our golden age, especially for the Marxists and the left, is in the future, right? And we're going to attain it. And of course, the reality is no, you're just going to degenerate yourself faster, is what an ancient Roman or a Greek philosopher or an Egyptian sage would say to you. You're just going to degenerate yourself faster with that progress stuff. You got to hold to your traditions. You got to hang on to something solid. And of course, when you get to Jung with his experimentation, Jung was very much influenced, of course, by this idea that there was these answers in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And of course, that is the pagan antiquity, which then puts you at odds with Christianity and the Christian culture.
Yeah. So, and it says here, Greek mythology became a dominating point of reference in the works of literary figures of German high culture, especially in the works of Goethe. Through Goethe and the German Romantics, and through the widespread adoption of the teaching of Latin and Greek in secondary schools and universities, almost everyone had some familiarity with Greco-Roman mythology and culture, or could cite passages from pagan authors that would be commonly recognized, such widespread familiarity among persons at many levels of society in German Europe could seem quite mystifying to British or American visitors. And they actually, he quotes an example of that when somebody was surprised at how fascinated people were over here with Rome and Greece. Now, I had to learn Latin in school, they still do that. So you can now choose not to have that subject. You can choose to something else, but they still teach that in schools. They teach you Latin in our schools, especially in Bavaria.
Well, I should point out that before the World War One, when you had Kaiser Wilhelm, well, Kaiser is the proper Latin pronunciation of Caesar. That's some kind of corruption of Latin. That's what do you call it, Church Latin, to say Caesar, but it's actually his name was pronounced Kaiser.
Yeah.
So Kaiser Wilhelm is Caesar Wilhelm, right?
Yeah, and so it's like this when you have, according to modern science, when you have 1% of the population, or more than 1% of the population being psychopaths, clinical psychopaths. You could verify that through psychiatrists. You can verify through the genetics and a brain scan. It's all been done.
And 16% narcissists, malignant narcissists.
Yeah, and malignant narcissists. So it's sometimes these characters are hard to detect when you don't have them in a clinical setting, when you can brain scan them, when you cannot do a genetic analysis of them. Sometimes it's hard to recognize them, so you don't know if your neighbor or some neighbor that you don't know that well. You don't know if this person is a psychopath. And so it's the same when it comes to, people interested in the ancient world, or this Masonic lodge or that Masonic lodge, or some political movement. I mean, you cannot look into a crystal ball and the ball will tell you that, this group is dangerous, they're psychopaths. It's a meticulous process you have to do to estimate if a person or a group is indeed dangerous. Now, this is something that I think Carl Jung was lacking, and I think Jordan Peterson is lacking that as well. It's the knowledge about the intelligence world, because the intelligence world is about acquiring information, especially from human sources. So you have to get people to trust you. You have to be able to estimate who you'll be working with, or how a foreign leader is. So we see quite a bit of advanced techniques being used by the intelligence agencies, and even today, if an intelligence agency can get a genetic sample of someone, they can look at the genetic material and determine, does he have any specific genes that are associated with a psychopathic brain that develops. So there's all kinds of tools you can do. I mean, and so this is part of this task of defeating evil, really. So this was the question that Carl Gustav Jung was occupied with. How do we get rid of the evil? And he tried to accomplish this with some nicer forms of mystery cults. And then, of course, he progressed, he matured, and he became more specific and more knowledge about these things. And I don't think that Jordan Peterson has progressed in that sense, because he's lacking, in my view, the understanding of the intelligence realm, and he's also lacking in applying modern science about evil. I mean, if you can only get so many years of Vladimir Putin in power, and you can look at this Russian system only for so long until you have to conclude with a very, very, very high degree of probability, Russia is a psychopathic system. It's through and through psychopathic. The leadership is psychopathic, and this trickles down, throughout the entire population. And so Russia may market itself as nice. Russia markets itself as the third Rome, as Christian, but it's a psychopathic system run by the KGB, and they
Did you happen to see Jordan Peterson's hour plus long? It was done a year ago, July. It was a giant monologue about Ukraine. Did you happen to see that?
Yeah, I have a commentary on that because I looked at these things, so I have some notes on that. Yeah.
Well, what shocked me, having followed Peterson and having heard Peterson talk about evil and quote Solzhenitsyn, especially quote um, Dostoevsky, uh, and so on, and Jung about evil, that he he would then and talk about the Holocaust before in the past and what the Nazis did, that he would come out and he would say basically, well, we have to avoid nuclear war, we have to avoid being hurt ourselves, we have to. And here's a guy who had stood up against wokeism on the campus in Canada and said, I'm not going to use gender pronouns. You're going to have to fire me. You're going to have to put me in jail. I'm not going to do it. So here's a guy who had the courage to stand up against something he thought was wrong. But here he's saying we need to run away from something, from an evil that's
Yeah.
wrong. And that shocked me because it was so different from what he had been before. He had been this tiger who stood up and said, I don't care what you do to me. And he's saying to the West, consider safety first, consider your survival chances first rather than what's right or wrong. Let these people be slaughtered so that you don't take the risk of being hurt yourself. Um, my gosh, it bothered me that it seemed very inconsistent to me
Yeah.
because there are wrong choices in strategy and war. There are wrong choices, but retrospectively now, when we're past 2 years of the war, we have crossed literally 14 of Putin's red lines where they said they would nuke us, and they haven't. So that means they were bluffing. So you're going to let evil bluff you into allowing them to murder millions of people and then
Yeah.
get an opportunity to get stronger and murder millions more?
Yeah, I commented on this video. It's called Russia versus Ukraine or Civil War in the West. I think this is the one you're referring to, but he probably talked about the same topic in multiple videos. This is where he's sitting in front of a blue and black backdrop. He's in a suit and he's just on a chair and he's talking about all these things. So I commented on that. At the 13-minute mark, he basically says that we shouldn't care about Ukraine and the Russians need Ukraine to feel safe. And also, then he's talking about the Christianity in Russia and how the Russians are supposedly against this Western degeneracy. And Jordan Peterson calls Alexander Dugin a genuine philosopher. Wow, Dugin is an occultist, and we talked about Dugin for quite a bit in one of the previous shows. And so this goes on and on like this. It's very, very baseline. It's very primitive to me. And then he says this. This is at the 43-minute mark of the video. He says the following: we cannot do without the Russians on our side. Really?
Yes, that's right. He said we cannot do without the Russians on our side, and he said we need Russia to counterbalance China, which is, of course, one of these childish things that you hear again and again coming from the right. With people who don't really know what China and Russia are and how closely they've been aligned for decades.
Yeah, and so when I looked at Jordan Peterson, I mean, I started to notice him a couple of years ago when he became famous and his videos were being recommended by the YouTube algorithm and people were writing me I should look at Jordan Peterson's lectures. in these lecture videos, they had interesting titles, so I would click on a few of them, but I would get bored very, very quickly because it always seemed like a bunch of very simple ideas, and he's sprinkling some big words into his presentation, and he has the suit, he has the look. But I never really found an original thought, and I never really found anything that I would consider advanced, because he's trained in. I mean, he has a degree in political science and psychology, and then a PhD in clinical psychology. So he's an expert on dealing with people with addictions. But then,
which is very odd because he had addiction. How can he developed an addiction himself so bad he had to go to Russia to have it treated?
Yeah, I mean
that is really puzzling to me.
Yeah, I mean people. He was always very adamant about this point. He was about telling people you should, face your pain and face your sorrows and face the problems and not use anything to numb it. But then he got hooked on.
But he was doing that. He was actually doing that.
Benzodiazepines, and that was at a time when everybody knew how addictive they are. I mean, my own father was addicted to the stuff that was prescribed to him. I mean, that started in the 70s, I think. So
they were getting people addicted to tranquilizers in the 1940s.
Yeah, so I mean, I know what this looks like, and so nowadays it's in the you can find this information in these packages when you look at the information that's presented to you. You're only supposed to take it for a short period of time. Not turn this into an addiction, which is really hard to kick. So he went into this knowing how dangerous this is and knowing what could result. Yeah. And
well, that's the false moral tone. This is the problem with people. I mean, we all are in danger of this. If we become celebrities, we're in danger of not being able to get past ourselves. And then suddenly our potential for messing up becomes greater, I think, when we become famous. And Jordan Peterson became a celebrity because he refused to go along with laws enforcing, non-binary gender pronouns. And he risked his career for the sake of free speech. And many of us admired this outspoken, courageous stand. I mean, it was very admirable. This is what made him an important person. But now, in terms of the moral tone of Peterson's discourse, his condemnation of Russian military aggression, which he does pro forma do, it rings hollow. Because his analysis of the Ukraine war is riddled with equivocal statements. And this is the thing, they say drug addicts, one of the things drugs do to you is it makes you equivocal. It makes you morally equivocal. That is, people who have drug addictions you can't trust them. Right? Yeah. They don't really stick by what they do. And so Peterson says things like, well, Putin's a thug, yet he's a practicing Christian, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's also, I mean, when Jordan Peterson took like a year off to get sober, however they achieved this in Russia, he took a year off and then he came back and I remember his first videos when he tried to make it appear as if his suffering because of the addiction, because of withdrawal, he made it seem like his suffering was greater than other people's suffering, as if it was incredibly special. He went through literal hell. It's almost like he's a martyr. He sounds like he wants to be considered a martyr, even though there's so many people that got hooked onto benzodiazepines, opiates, that sort of thing. I mean, there's an opioid epidemic in America, and it's been going on for many years.
It's incredible.
And it's so what happened to Peterson was just so common, but he seems to have a problem with, having a normal problem. He doesn't want to appear normal. He always wants to create the aura that he's special and he's especially smart and he's on a special mission. But that's the sort of thing that I see lacking in his work. I don't see any originality, and I don't see anything that strikes me as really smart. And I read a ton of
Well,
books. I read a ton
in
of
his
books, and I
yeah.
always find original stuff. I always find really smart stuff. It's not like I only consider myself to be smart. I
Yeah.
constantly read, and I constantly
Yeah.
find really smart stuff and original stuff. I just don't find it from Jordan Peterson.
Well, and I've seen Peterson, some of his work where he does analyze psychologically things, and it is quite brilliant. I think we have to admit that he is capable of doing very good work. Um, but when he says he says the invasion by Russia of Ukraine is unconscionable, then he turns around and says that Russia is a bulwark against the moral decadence of the West. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You cannot be so equivocal. You have to actually, as Machiavelli said, choose a side. You cannot, and when this equivocal position turns out to be a pro-Russian position, when it's finally analyzed, then you think, no, this is insincerity. This is a lack of moral discernment, backed with making the right qualifying statements. Um, you know, uh, Peterson says Putin collaborates with the genuine philosopher, as you say, who he
Dugin.
calls Alexander Dugin. No. Here's Peterson's thesis of the Ukraine war. This is a quote. Are we the West degenerate in a profoundly threatening manner? All right. So we're degenerate in a threatening manner. So that allows then Putin to invade a country and murder hundreds of thousands of people because our decadence is threatening him.
Because
I
we
mean,
have,
that to me is obscene,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, initially, as a young man, Peterson was a member of the New Democratic Party from ages 13 to 18. As a teenager, Peterson decided that religion was for the ignorant, weak, and superstitious, and hoped for a left-wing revolution, a hope that lasted until he met left-wing activists in college. Well, and so then he became obsessed, it says, with the Cold War and the possibility of a nuclear apocalypse. And then he wanted to work on the big question: why is the world so evil and crazy, and how can we fix it? Now, I mentioned this earlier. If you want to answer this question, and I've been about this question since I was 6 years old, because in Germany is a very dysfunctional country, and it's the people here are very, very complicated, and so. I quoted these numbers: one third of the German population is mentally ill in a clinical sense. This is the official numbers, and that doesn't even include the undiagnosed narcissists and the psychopaths. Okay, so it's not a pleasant place to be, and so as a child, I was baffled by this world. And the more questions I asked, about what's this on television, what's this stuff on the news, what does that mean? And so imagine my father being on prescribed, benzodiazepines. My father tries to explain to his 6-year-old sort of the basic outline of the Cold War. And so I was always about this question: why is the world so crazy and evil? And it takes a great effort to figure this one out, and it takes so many different fields of science, and you have to read so many different brilliant people, because there's so much that goes into it. You have to know about history, you have to know about older history, you have to know about techniques of imperialism, the whole military aspect. You have to know about the intelligence world, psychopathology, the brain, the way groups function or not function, the genetics of evil. There's so many things that you have to understand. And so how did Jordan Peterson try to answer this question? Well, he travels to Europe. He takes a year off in the 80s. He takes a year off, visits Europe, and he reads the works of Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, okay? Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Okay, so then he gets home to Canada, gets his BA in psychology, then a PhD in clinical psychology. But he's always interested in the bigger topics. I mean, he's good at treating or understanding addicts, but his real genuine desire was to answer these bigger questions, right? That's really what he's about. And so then in 1999, he publishes his first book. It's called Maps of Meaning. It was published by Routledge, and it took Peterson 13 years to complete the book. And initially, it basically sold almost 0 copies. And there's a good summary on the book. You can find that at on the website of Psychology Today. It's a review by Jessica Schrader. The headline is Jordan Peterson's Murky Maps of Meaning. It's a very negative review. And she breaks down the message. Okay, so the message is myths are culturally universal. Myths, according to Peterson, are the psychological origin of morality. And myths are the philosophical basis for morality. And myth-based morality grounds political judgments about totalitarian states. Well, so
And yet, it's very strange. This is the same guy that is willing. He's creating a myth of the West is so decadent that Russia should be given free rein to stomp anybody they want. I mean, that's basically, I'm simplifying his thesis, but that's his thesis. And the thing is that there's corruption everywhere. Come on, give me a break. Everybody, the Russians are more corrupt than we are, and just basic everyday corruption, and the China is too. So their corruption is somehow qualitatively less bad than ours, so we have to let them run over other people. And this is horrifying. I mean, in his book, Hitler and the Germans, the political philosopher Eric Berglund there, he set up a center in Munich there in Bavaria where you are. He explained that our very first reality is a moral reality. That is truth, right? There is such a thing as truth with a capital T. And those who want to evade the truth with a capital T end up adopting a false reality that permits killing and other horrors, right? This is the essence of moral degeneracy, according to Berglund, this political philosopher. And so in the case of Jordan Peterson, we have a professor who once stood against moral degeneracy, but now he inexplicably offers an apology for killing other people.
Yeah.
And
also,
the Russians killing people in Ukraine.
And also
don't understand.
And also we understand how the Russian Empire works, and we understand how they would conduct a bigger war in stages. So it's not like that Russia would be content with Ukraine or part of Ukraine. And so, but this is all these military affairs. This is something that I don't think Jordan Peterson understands. So he's trying to solve this question with philosophy, but it's almost like trying to understand, it's almost like trying to understand mechanical engineering with plant biology. It's just different. It's just two different things. You cannot apply this one field of knowledge, apply it to everything, and solve everything. I mean, this is
it requires actual specific knowledge about the thing you're talking about. But what's really, it is frightening because Berglund wrote that this kind of cooperation, which Peterson's really cooperating with the Russians by saying, look, you have permission to do this because the West is degenerate. It's a participation by Jordan Peterson in a crime, which falls under the notion of accessory. And one becomes an accessory after the fact by providing rhetorical cover for malefactors engaged in mass slaughter. Now, for me, my belief is that, even when President Trump bragged about ordering a hit on Soleimani, the Iranian general, okay, not a good person, not a friend of the United States, an enemy, but Soleimani was at the Baghdad airport going to a parley. He was going to a negotiation. to meet with the president or the prime minister of Iraq, and he was murdered at the airport by a drone strike or whatever it was. And see, now to me that's evil, right? I'm not going to give in. And you know what really shocked me? This was my naivety about my fellow Americans. Every single American I knew, maybe except for one or two people, thought that was perfectly fine to kill an enemy on his way to a parley with a drone strike. I just, and by all the rules, the moral rules of war, and the just basic chivalry, basic knowledge of right and wrong, you got to be disgusted by an act like that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
And
but
I
see,
don't.
people don't have a moral compass anymore.
Yeah,
They
and I
just
don't.
don't, and they
I
pretend to have one.
I always have a problem with gimmick-based ideologies. Okay, so this is when, like, for example, this is when communists they try to, they explain it in very simplistic terms. It's about participation and sharing, and not having few people own everything, and it's like everybody gets to decide things, and everybody gets to have part of everything, and so they make it about this gimmick, but in reality is so much more complex than this. And so even somebody like Albert Einstein talked about communism, and he sounded like a college student or somebody who has just gotten into ideologies. If you look up Albert Einstein, especially in connection with this stupid Oppenheimer movie that's been showered with awards now, I talked about that movie. Oppenheimer didn't like Albert Einstein, and Albert Einstein was not allowed anywhere near the Manhattan Project to make the nuclear bomb because Einstein was a communist. And if you listen to or read Einstein's words on communism, it sounds like some kid who just got into political ideologies. It's just about, well,
Childish.
Lenin was a great man because he tried all these good things, and Einstein said that what he called he called it something like anarchy capitalism. Like there's no real rule, there's no real order. It's just winner takes all, anarchy capitalism. That's the root of all evil. And if we get rid of that, then we can fix the entire world. I mean, even somebody with a high IQ can be terribly wrong about something if he's not really knowledgeable about that topic. I mean, this is the quintessential Dunning-Kruger effect. And even the Dunning-Kruger story, the Dunning-Kruger study, they didn't even ask people about important topics. I mean, they figured out that people overestimate their abilities in areas they're not knowledgeable in. But if you talk about, hard-hitting topics, security-related, religion-related, even more people will overestimate themselves even more, because that's just, unfortunately, how powerful these ideologies are. And so I don't like this gimmicky stuff. And also, then you get radical libertarians, and they say, we can solve any question, we can solve any problem. It's just by getting the government out of it. Just having everything private, that's going to fix everything. But this is not the universal answer to everything. And I had
No, of course not.
I debated radical libertarians, and they told me, well, if you conduct a war and you have a fully libertarian society, some people would, band together, buy a tank, and then set themselves a military goal, and then they can make money with achieving that military goal. And I couldn't believe how little these people actually understood about war, because they think they don't have to know about it. They don't have to be knowledgeable in all these topics because they have their magical gimmick, and this magical gimmick is going to solve everything. And so I think this is the problem of Jordan Peterson. He thinks he's found the magic key, this magic key to unlock morality and create a moral world, and he can solve everything by applying this principle. But to me, it is warmed over Freemasonry. I mean, here's a quote. It says, mythological renditions of history, like those in the Bible, are just as true, quote unquote true, as the standard Western empirical renditions. Just as literally true, but how they are true is different. Western historians describe, or think they describe, what happened. The traditions of mythology and religion describe the significance of what happened. okay, wait a minute. So what is his definition of true then? Is it useful? Is it when it's causing people to behave morally, then it's true to him? I mean, just it gets into that kind of territory, and it's like Freemasons. Freemasons will happily tell you they use allegories and these old stories and inspirations from the ancient world, and they use that to make a person better or make him perfect and turn him into a master mason, and he will then have a greatest sense of morality and bring morals to the world.
Well,
That
of
didn't work
course,
so well in the British Empire.
yeah, of course, philosophically, if you go back to Plato, there's a realm where everything's perfect and it's perfectly ordered and organized, and you have this God who's the creator of all. That is the a speculation on what you would call what became the Christian God, the God who is ultimately good, the God that created order. And mythology, to some of these culture historians and stuff and psychologists, and I think what Peterson is saying is mythology reflects the divine order in its structures, right? And that's how we're going to. And so he is saying, look, the Bible, and I think Peterson would say, he did this thing on Genesis, the Bible is mythology, Peterson would say. And then it has these structures that give you morality. But then, of course, he's perfectly happy to say, oh, the monstrosity of the Holocaust and the Nazis.
Hmm.
But yet, when the Holocaust is genocide is ongoing against Ukraine, Peterson says nobody gives a damn about Ukraine. I mean, those are literally his words in that July 2022 thing. Nobody gives a damn about Ukraine. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Could you imagine him in
Um,
1943 saying, we shouldn't be sacrificing American lives fighting Germany? Nobody gives a damn about the Jews, right?
yeah. I
Or
mean,
the Slavs?
and also, I mean, Jordan Peterson is not going as far as some of the others that are popular influencers, but it's close. And I want to mention briefly one comparison. Now, this is from Alex Jones. Alex Jones had explicitly said that the spirit of 1776 is in Russia. So Russia has Putin. They have that spirit of 1776. Now, you cannot compare Vladimir Putin to George Washington. It's more like there's a similarity between Vladimir Putin and King George III, right? That's a more suitable comparison. Now, American patriots, they will celebrate Independence Day, but how much do people actually know what these Americans became independent of? What do they know about King George III and the British Empire? And what it could do to a colony. Now, for example, the colony of India. There's a study out. It's called "What the British Did to India" by Shashi Tharoor, and this is something that, had things gone a bit differently, this is something that could have happened to America, the American colonies of Britain, destroying society, like in India, destroying the economy and having it all very much under control.
Well, look
And
at
having
Ireland.
and having everything starvation, intentional starvation, and having everything under surveillance. So if anybody wants to rebel, they would be grabbed and tortured for information. And this stuff that happened to India and, as you said, other places, this stuff could have happened to the American colonies without independence. So it wasn't just King George III, obviously, because the British Empire was much more complex, but still, this is what America became independent of. And nowadays, when Alex Jones talks about this stuff, or Jordan Peterson tries to mix American patriotism, American conservatism, sort of conflate that with the Russians. I mean, to me, that's just insane, because if you follow that line of argument as an American, you would need to burn your American flags, burn your American, birth certificate or passport or whatever, and you would have to pledge allegiance to King Charles of Great Britain by that same logic, right? Because Ukraine voted for independence. Okay, same term. The Ukrainians voted for independence. They had this document drafted in the 90s, and this document said the borders of Ukraine have to remain secure. This right now is Ukraine, including Crimea, including all the other stuff. This is Ukraine.
About the Budapest memorandum, and by the way, it's true that all of Ukraine
cannot be violated, and the Russians agreed to that. The Russians agreed to that.
The Russians agreed to it. Yeah, absolutely. No, it would have been far more respectable if Peterson had only said, "I believe we should abandon Ukraine because nuclear war with Russia is not worth the risk." Then we could have a discussion on the merits of appeasement versus confrontation. But Peterson didn't do that. He said the West does not have the moral high ground in this conflict. And he said, we have no right to oppose Russian atrocities. He suggested that the West has morally contaminated Ukraine so that Russia's been forced to stem the pestilence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and he only made one faux pas from the Russian point of view. He didn't refer to the invasion as a special military operation. So, but everything else he was on board with, and Peterson says in this war, the West is being self-aggrandizing, a crime far worse than invading a neighboring country after declaring it's no country at all, then knocking down its cities, killing and kidnapping tens or hundreds of thousands of its people. I mean, Jordan Peterson, you are now a moral nullity.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is where he completely lost me. And see, the thing is that this is the difference when he quotes. I mean, Dostoevsky was a kind of giant as a writer. He quotes Dostoevsky. Solzhenitsyn was a kind of giant, even though at the end, when he was very old, he gave way to Putin and Putinism. But this thing that Peterson has done is so foul. In this biggest issue that we're confronting right now, that Europe is confronting, I don't think you can come back from it. I don't think that once you've gone there, you can't. I mean, we all make mistakes. I make mistakes. But that is a big one, because you are becoming an accessory to mass murder when you do that.
Yeah. Here it says, Peterson thinks that the solution to totalitarian horrors and spiritual sickness is the heroic individual. It says the hero rejects identification with the group as the ideal of life, preferring to follow the dictates of his conscience and his heart. His identification with meaning and his refusal to sacrifice meaning for security renders existence acceptable despite its tragedy. A society predicated upon belief in the paramount divinity of the individual allows personal interest to flourish and to serve as the power that opposes the tyranny of culture and the terror of nature. Wait, the paramount divinity of the individual. Okay, so that sounds like the early Jung, Carl Gustav Jung. So apparently Jordan Peterson has not moved beyond that, but it takes a lot more than conscience and heart. It takes knowledge about the empires, it takes knowledge about the intelligence world, and it takes the ability to look through this deception that is so professionally done in this world. So, I mean, we can tell he wanted to be this hero himself, Peterson, when he opposed this gender speak, this thing at the universities, right? He wanted to be that kind of a hero, but this is just one topic. This was just one thing, and he rejects
one thing that he got famous for. And of course he was very fortunate he didn't get destroyed. Anna Politkovskaya, who, was a Russian journalist who was brutally assassinated in 2006, shot outside the lift by her apartment. Here's what she said about Putin shortly before her death, probably one of the things she said that got her killed. Here's the quote. "I dislike him, Putin, for the matter-of-factness, worse than felony, of his cynicism, for his lies, for the gas he used in the Nordost siege, for the massacre of the innocents that went on through his first term as president." And she was murdered almost 20 years ago now, 18 years ago. A lady from the same generation as myself, she's the same age as me, if she were alive today. And you compare her stand on Putin
Yeah.
versus Peterson's. It's Politkovsky saw where Putin was taking Russia. She said, in Russia, we have had leaders with this outlook before. It led to tragedy, to bloodshed on a vast scale, to civil wars. Because I want no more of that, I dislike this typical Soviet Chekist as he struts down the red carpet in the Kremlin on his way to the throne of Russia. Uh, Peterson, now the ultimate catastrophe for the people of Eastern Europe has taken place because of this man, Putin. And it was foreseen by people like Politkovsky. But Jordan Peterson says, oh, the West is culpable. The West is corrupt. Therefore, he gets to do it. He gets to murder all these people. Give him a pass.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the some of the marketing, the self-marketing of the Putin regime, it's somewhat reminiscent of it. It reminds us of the Nazi self-marketing. When the Nazis laid down their argument for taking this territory and then taking some more territory because everybody's against us and we're always the victim, and this great idea of an empire that would last 1,000 years, and the Roman tradition they wanted to preserve, and also the Nazis talked a lot about degeneracy. Okay, so this is what, and in this marketing before everything went downhill. This was attractive to many people. I mean, as I mentioned, everybody was, in university, everybody was learning Latin, and everybody was into the Roman Empire, and then came this Nazi movement, and they promised everybody what they wanted to hear, that this was going to be a revival of the Roman system, but not as degenerate as the medieval times, because the Nazis sort of implied that the aristocracies in Europe had been daft and weak, and they lost their way, and they became a bit too decadent, and so the Nazi Party was supposed to be a better Roman Empire, and it was going to be based on race and how much somebody contributes to the overall mission. It was not about what family you were born to. So this was the self-marketing, and they talked about many aspects of degeneracy. Just the party scene in Berlin. The corruption in the business world, socialist ideas that were floating around, and even Nazis. I mean, the highest level of the Nazi party, there were a lot of gay people, a lot of gay men. But they wanted to keep that among themselves, and overall they were cracking down against the gay clubs and the gay culture in Germany at the time. So in the Nazi self-marketing, they were seeing degeneracy everywhere, and they were selling themselves as the cure.
And yet they were degenerate themselves and
incredibly
corrupt
degenerate,
themselves.
incredibly degenerate, I mean. And it's now it's like 2024. It's not 1924. We know a lot more about the modern type crazy empires, and we know what to look out for. We know how to study. I mean, when I was in university in 2006, right? These professors would talk about how Russia was on a good way, how things were going to work out, and this is all going in a good direction. And I was respectfully disagreeing, and I said that, I mean, even though my knowledge at the time was far more limited, I just didn't see any genuine positive marker about the Russians. There was nothing
In
positive.
2006, the year that Anna Politkovsky and Alexander
Yeah.
Litvinenko were both murdered.
Yeah.
That same year by Putin.
My professors were still pro-Russia. At a Catholic university, by the way.
That's curious. So I'm curious. I don't know how much you've studied Peterson. Do you think? I mean, we're talking about Carl Jung's it's a long and complicated story. Carl Jung was became a psychiatrist because he was interested in the soul. And do you think that Peterson has? And I think if you look at the whole of Jung's work, he was learning, he was evolving, he did develop some understanding of the soul. And in his last book, one of his last books, The Undiscovered Self, he said that our modern politics is making us insane because we've dispensed with religion and that self reflection about our own sin, our own failings, and we are just projecting our shadow. We're saying all the evil is over there, whether it's on the Iranians or the Russians, and there is evil there, but there's also evil in us, right? Evil cuts through the middle of every human heart, and I think that this is what we have to always keep. We have to try to keep ourselves honest, and we have to, if we're going to make the world better, it has to start with each individual person thinking about, well, what is right and wrong, what is morality, what is reality, and looking into the soul. So this is the thing that amazes me. So when we look at Peterson, who is associated, he talks about Jung a lot. Is Peterson as diligent as Jung? Has he really learned, or is he just a celebrity who we can't take seriously, who has some insights and some intelligence, but who is ultimately misleading the people who he's advising?
I think there are some hidden clues, or more or less, there's some clues that I think we can interpret to get a better picture of the actual Jordan Peterson. One of the clues, or it's actually a double clue. It's about his two books. The first one, as I mentioned, Maps of Meaning in 1999. It took him 13 years to complete, and the other one, the book was called 12 Rules for Life. It came out in 2018, so it's almost 20 years later. So it takes him 13 years to write a book, then it takes him almost 20 years to write another. And I think I don't personally, I don't know which book I find worse, Maps of Meaning or 12 Rules for Life. But it basically it does show us, it shows me something. And when I look at his video lectures, it seems superficial. I think he's only good, and he can only work reasonably fast in a specific topic, which is his core topic. When he's researching the psychology of addiction, for example. I think this is the only field.
Let me just ask a question. If you've read those books, he's claiming that people construct their own meaning, that meaning isn't given.
Well, he's intentionally vague. I mean, he's intentionally vague about this. I mean, he talks about Gnostic concepts, but then he doesn't want to be too explicit. I mean, but he's giving you Freemasonry essentially, and that's very, very old school, and it's very outdated. And so I see this in his whole body of work. Besides his core issue, when it's about his core issue, he can work fast enough and he can get results. But outside of that core field that he worked in, outside of that field, he seems awfully slow to me, and derivative. So I think he has big problems just handling these other topics and working with these other topics and combining these other topics. It's just, if he writes two books in, what is it, 33, 32 years, he wrote two books in more than 30 years. And when I look at his video lectures,
and he's primarily a scholar. I mean, he's paid to be a scholar.
Yeah, and when I look at his lectures and when I look at what he says about Ukraine, it's always very superficial. It's something that you could pick up on by reading, a think tank paper here, a newspaper article there, just some very superficial research, and then you can just put that together and have a presentation. It seems like a lot of bluffing to me, because I mean, I can find really good literature in many different areas, and there's always something unique and there's always something special. But it seems like he's just not that kind of guy. He's not the guy he wants to be, and it's when he talks, I mean, when he talks about these 12 rules for life, it almost seems like he's condescending towards his audience, because he himself is really, really smart, and he thinks that other people are not smart. So he's giving people what he thinks they need to behave. He wants stability in society. And I think on some degree, on some level, these mythologies and these hero stories, and to some degree, Christianity for him is just tools. It's just tools for the average person out there, for the people he thinks of as stupid, and he wants these people to behave, and so give them what they need. But he himself, I think, is more interested in the early Jungian topics, the mysteries, and I think that's
So
how.
you think he is? I mean, I've never heard him really. He talks about myths and he talks about the unconscious. So, and he's using Jungian categories in a lot of areas, but he doesn't seem to use them very precisely. He's got his own. It seems to me that Peterson has his own dynamic of talking about women and men, and he couches it. He's very careful not to cross certain, actually some politically correct lines. So he's not. People, traditionalists and Christians, seem to like him, but he defends some of their stuff, but he really isn't a traditionalist or a conservative, is he?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's he probably believes he is all that, because he's aligning himself with Russia at a time when Russia is self-marketing as the third Rome. Just going back to this idealistic view that I talked about in Germany and Switzerland when Carl Gustav Jung was alive. This exaggerated, romanticized idea of ancient Greece as this perfect, serene society, and there were geniuses everywhere, and a genius was also a warrior, and everything was so perfect. And then this perfect empire was then spoiled, and it got lost, so we have to regain it. I think Jordan Peterson is still about that old idea of regaining this old paradise type system, and I think that he is willing, and that's my personal belief. I think that Peterson is willing to sacrifice Ukraine for that greater goal. He's willing to accept the victims in order to get closer to that new Rome or that new Greece, where everything is safe and everybody is smart, and everybody's just like Jordan Peterson views himself. I think he is.
Hmm.
I think ultimately he thinks that the evil forces, the left and the woke crowd and whatever, he thinks it's going to be grim anyway. There's going to be conflict anyway, so he's just siding with the empire he thinks is compatible with his Jungian ancient beliefs. This romanticized
Yeah,
view.
yeah. Which is interesting. It's kind of like the Dugan pose. The Dugan, and I'm going to be writing a piece about Charles Upton's book about Dugan, because there's a lot more. I mean, it's a thick book, and I should just show it to people because it is really fascinating. And to talk about Upton is a very sophisticated, philosophically sophisticated guy. This is Dugan against Dugan, right, by Charles Upton. Um, a traditionalist critique of the fourth political theory, and of course, the fourth political theory has some, very scary stuff in it, and that anticipates a lot of this transgenderism, which I think leads to transhumanism, is what I argued in my article this week. Is that you're on a trajectory, you're on a path. Anytime you do anything, you are setting up a direction, a kind of motion in a direction, and that's what troubles me about Tucker Carlson going and actually meeting Dugin in Moscow when he interviewed Putin, and with um, some of Trump's guys meeting with Dugin, like Steve Bannon, who had a meeting with Dugin in Rome in November of 2018. Um, uh, and the thing is that there is, okay. I'm not a narrow-minded person. You can learn from all kinds of people. It's like I don't care if my auto mechanic is a Muslim or worships trees or something. If he's a good auto mechanic, you can learn. There's all kinds of subjects you can learn from people, even though they may disagree with your theology or your personal beliefs. But there is a moment here where there are these moral truths. There is truth with a capital T, that if people are basically participating in a lie, which again excuses mass murder or killing people, that is, to me, that is where the structure of morality is absolute, right? And of course, that's why you have to be so careful when you engage in warfare or you engage in policies that can cause life to be lost. This is a huge, massive burden. A burden that, for example, President Lincoln in the Civil War felt, that proper, decent people feel when they're involved with it. But I don't. When somebody cavalierly says, like Jordan Peterson, nobody gives a damn about Ukraine.
Yeah.
It to me, it gives him away as not being authentic, not being true. And it's the same thing with Dugin. When he goes through America must be destroyed, he talks about actually destroying America all the time. Then he comes over and he sits with Alex Jones and he talks about how he loves Americans, right?
Yeah.
Traditionalist America. You're really
Yeah.
traditionalist. I just hate your government. Then you just see through. There's an insincerity. There's a betrayal of the truth in the service of murder, of mass murder, that is undeniable at some level.
Yeah. And
And
also,
and that's the difference to me in between
yeah,
someone
I
who's
mean,
really
if
a
if
kind of
somebody
betrayal and not.
if somebody becomes famous to the degree that we've seen with Jordan Peterson, I mean, it's any mistake that he makes, any false thing that he preaches to his audience becomes more dangerous. The bigger your audience, the bigger your mistake is going to have an effect. And I think that there's so many mistakes, dangerous mistakes here. I mean, we talked about this in an earlier show about Dugin and the Russian occultists. This idea that is also promoted somewhat by Jordan Peterson. This idea that you can just, as a right winger in America, as a conservative, as a Christian, that you could just take psychedelic drugs and you go out in nature and you disengage from the modern world and you just embrace nature and the mysterious. And also, this is something that people have experienced all over the world when they take psychedelics. There are different psychedelic plants, all kinds of plants, and it's usually the same group of alkaloids, right? So you take ayahuasca in some Latin American bush, or you take a certain type of cactus, or you smoke a certain type of what is it? What do they call it? Yeah, there's different types of fungus. I mean, there's some plants over here in Germany. They are decorative plants, and if you actually dry them and smoke them, you would have a really, really extreme trip, and people use that for decoration, and then of course people remember that you can actually smoke these plants. So this is something that has been done all over the world. Especially it's been done in the mystery cults, and sometimes people have similar types of experiences and they believe they are in contact with beings. Now, an experience like that can have profound repercussions for that person. That person can be more vulnerable to certain types of propaganda, and they can also get deeper into a cult system. And what's typical for a cult system or mystery cult system, they can warp your definitions of morality. So they will, at the beginning, they will present to you a classic type morality. This is something that Jordan Peterson talks about in public. It's very simple, cut and dry. The hero who goes against the bad guys, even though it's dangerous. But the deeper you get into this stuff, especially when it's tied to the empires, the more your sense of morality can become warped and it can become defective. Now, some cultures, they have actually they have sort of given up on fighting evil. This is when certain cultures say there has to be a balance of good and bad. So there's like it's we cannot change it, and it's always going to be like that. So it's almost like the world runs on autopilot. So you have to accept evil, try to counterbalance it somewhat, and just hope for the best. And so there's all these different type of concepts when it comes to evil. And when Jordan Peterson is preaching this stuff, this can have some pretty serious consequences. I don't even think that Peterson is aware of all the consequences this might have, because apparently young people are listening to him. So it's like these teenagers and people in their early 20s, they're listening to Jordan Peterson, and they want to shape their lives according to his woozy message, and then they just start repeating what Jordan Peterson says about the Russians, right? And I mean, this is something that Peterson should be able to recognize for what it is. I mean, if he's as intelligent as he claims he is, and if he's always been interested in the topic of evil in the empires, he should be able to look through the Russian propaganda, what the Russian system really is, and how dangerous it is. I mean, this is something that I would expect him to be able to do, but either he's not able to do it, or he's not willing to do it for some strange reason. And of course, when you talk about
it is because I think he has become, in a sense, attached to a political cause on the right. And somebody who is elevated, who is promoted by people, ends up being attached to these interests. And I think these interests are unwilling. For Peterson to be promoting the idea that Russia is our ally to counterbalance China is to show that he hasn't understood the essential evil in Beijing and Moscow. That they are determined to destroy the West and the United States and to dominate the world. And that they realize they have to do it together because each one of them can't do it on their own. And he hasn't grasped that. Because, and this is my experience, when I wrote Origins of the Fourth World War, it was a shattering experience to confront the evil of totalitarianism, which I think is what Peterson talks about confronting. But he's not really shattered by it because he evidently didn't really see it. Because it really is a world-destroying. I mean, when Carl Jung wrote his historical book, the Aeon, okay, there's, whatever heresies he promotes, he's examining the book of Revelation, he's examining prophecies about the future, he's looking as a psychologist with all of his empirical background, and he says Antichrist is real. He says in this book, he says, look, he defines Antichrist. It's someone who promises the same thing as Christ promised and delivers the exact opposite. And he said, communism, Marxist-Leninism, is the concentrated form of the Antichrist movement in history. He says this in this book. And this book is, Aeon is incredibly fascinating. There's things to disagree within, but there's insights, powerful insights about evil. And he says in this book that evil is something that when you do look at it, you are shattered by it, if you're really looking at it, because it's something that, again, we all can be subject to evil. And to speak about, and again, I go to Voegelin's definitions of evil. And Voegelin, again, people will say, Voegelin's not really a Christian. I've had people say that. Of course, Voegelin is defending Christianity the way Jung did at the end of his life. Okay, maybe imperfectly, maybe he's not a Christian, okay, but he is really defending it and saying, oh my gosh, this is what we have left to defend ourselves with. And we are facing a kind of a Holocaust, mass genocide, and you can see it. It's logically entailed in in their totalitarian structures of thought, in the characters of Marx and Lenin and all of these folks, and in all of their followers. They're all the little microcosms of this evil, even though they may even seem like very benign people, and some of them are, but they're reflecting something that's evil without recognizing it. And this is the thing we have to come to terms with. Unless we can develop that discernment to be able to see it, how can we fight it? We can't even recognize our enemy. And if Jordan Peterson, the famous psychologist, can't recognize real evil and stand against it when it's wiping out a country right in front of our eyes, I don't know. It's horrifying to think.
Yeah, yeah, and there's something about yeah. There's some quotes when he was Jordan Peterson was asked about religion, and he was in a 2017 interview. Peterson was asked if he was a Christian. He responded, "I suppose the most straightforward answer to that is yes." When asked if he believes in God, Peterson responded, "I think the proper response to that is no, but I'm afraid he might exist." In a podcast with Douglas Murray and Jonathan
Oh,
Pageau, Peterson stated that God is the ultimate fictional character, which is at the top of the hierarchy of attention and action. Um, yeah, and then writing for The Spectator, Tim Lott said Peterson draws inspiration from the Jungian interpretation of religion and holds similar views to the Christian existentialism of Søren Kierkegaard and Paul Tillich. So, I mean, it sounds like you know, that Christianity for him is just another traditional type myth. It's a template to him. It's like something that has been done in multiple versions around the world, and this is just Christianity is just one example of this template, and everybody is into the same templates. This is kind of the old Jung, right? This is the early
yeah.
Jung that said that the mystery cults, that's
Well,
where it's at.
Jung, when he was asked, in his old age, there's a famous BBC documentary interview with Jung, and he was asked, "Do you believe in God?" He said, "No, I don't have to believe in God because I know God is real," is what Jung said, which is really interesting. If Peterson said that God is what, he didn't believe in God, he thought God was a mythical character. Is that what he
Fictional
said?
character.
Fictional. That's different than mythical, right? That's even lower down the scale. Myth isn't actually just simply fiction. But um, my goodness, I didn't know he'd made that statement. Um, I should make a comment about German scholarship and Christianity going back. Both Nietzsche and Marx were influenced by the same uh, teacher. And Nietzsche was a philologist, and of course Marx was studying philosophy, which involved, knowing ancient languages. And some of these this was something peculiar to German academics. When they would learn the ancient Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic and so on, they would lose their faith, because usually the brand of Protestantism, and I think it's usually Protestants that they believed in, they discovered certain things in the actual reading in the original language, which was not what they had been led to believe when they were younger. So they had this experience of um, losing their faith. Nietzsche very famously went from being a very devout Christian to all of a sudden just not accepting it at all. And Marx had the same thing. Marx was raised a Christian, by the way. He wasn't raised in a synagogue, and so they lost their faith. This we find this in German academics, German language academics. Carl Jung was Swiss, but he was in the German language. We find this in almost all of them, whether it's Karl Jaspers or Eric Berglund. They're not Christians in the sense that ordinary people are, because they've been exposed to Greek philosophy. They've been exposed to ancient languages. They've read the Old Testament in the original Hebrew. They have come to understand that it's all more. There's a lot more to it. It's more complicated. And you have people like Berglund who want to preserve Christianity, even though their understanding of it is different from your average person. And people like Carl Jung who come back and say, "Oh no, we need this. We can't. There is no road back to this pagan Greek world, demonic world." Um, but the problem is that so people have to understand there are powerful insights in these writers for understanding our political dilemma, the civilization, the crisis of modernity, right? To understanding it, these guys have important insight, and we need all the insights we can get. And Peterson has some insights too, but the minute they go over to the enemy of Western civilization, of right and wrong, then we have to call them out, right?
Yeah. Um, so when I commented on this video that Peterson had done on the Ukraine war, this almost 1 hour video, he talks about Ukraine, and then he just switches over to speaking about the degeneracy of the West, and so he's creating this. He's creating sort of this argument, not explicitly, but underneath the surface, he, as far as I can tell, he's trying to tell the audience that maybe this is a just war, that the Russians are waging in Ukraine, because he does insinuate this argument. We've heard it so many times before, that NATO was closing in against Russia and all that nonsense, and so underneath the surface, it almost sounds as if he's trying to say this is a just war. Putin is that mythological hero, this archetype hero that Jordan Peterson was writing about and that Jung was writing about. Putin is doing a thing that is unpopular and dangerous, but Putin is doing it because it's right. I'm not 100% sure if that's what Jordan Peterson is trying to say, but I think it's a very strong possibility. Peterson maybe doesn't want to say it outright, because that would get him canceled, or that just it's bad for business. But it's almost like
he basically does say that. It's basically what he says. The West is degenerate, and Putin may be a bad guy, may be a rough character, but the West is worse. And therefore, what Mr. Putin wants to do has some justice and has some rightness to it, right? That's ultimately when you get done with all the fudging. You make qualifying statements that really contradict your main statement. And that's how it's called hedging, right? So, well, I didn't really say that. Then you can go back and quote yourself as saying the opposite when you're accused. Scholars are famous for doing this. That's why their writings, so many second-rate scholarly writings, are so horrible to read, because before they say anything, they have all these things where they say, "I'm not going to really say this," and then they say it, right? So that they can't be found in any error, because they're anticipating that there's something wrong with what they're saying. And that's what he does, because that's what he was. He was a scholar. He taught at Harvard. He was at the University of Toronto. So, it's just bad. It's not forthright, and it's very disappointing. And I should say, a lot of when I first heard Jordan Peterson, I thought of this book. It was a very good little book. William Hubin. Yeah, I think it's probably Jordan Peterson's cheat sheet. It's a very good little book. I found this in the 1980s in a bookstore in a mall that I used to hang out at and just read the books. I couldn't afford everything I wanted to read, so I'd read a book in the bookstore, and then I'd take one home. But Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Kafka by William Hubin. And this is a little gem, by the way. This is a really great little book about these four guys. And the original title was, I think it called it The Four Horsemen. I I somehow my old copy got so shredded. It's just a paperback. I ordered a new one a few years ago, so I'd have a fresh copy around here. But it's really great little mini history analysis of these four guys: Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Kafka, showing how these guys all had this rather apocalyptic vision of the future of our civilization and what was wrong with it and what was wrong with our, the decline. And of course, Hubin is a Christian. So he's writing from this from a Christian point of view, but it's a beautiful little book, and it seems to me that Peterson is. I thought the first time I heard him, I thought, oh, he sounds just like Hubin, but not quite, right? Peterson's got his own modern psychological twist on it. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, and here's something about uh, that addiction episode, and I also think that Peterson wants to frame himself as a martyr-like figure, almost a Jesus-like figure, because he views himself as this great hero, working against the dark forces. And of course, every great hero in these old stories, every great hero must suffer. He needs to go through hell, and have and experience all this pain and come out on the other end. And so it says Peterson spent 8 days in a medically induced coma at an unnamed clinic in Russia. Peterson's daughter posted a video claiming that she and her father had traveled to Russia seeking an unorthodox treatment for his physical dependence on the drug clonazepam. And according to Michaela, he nearly died several times during his medical ordeal. After weeks in intensive care, he was unable to speak or write and was taking anti-seizure medicine. So it's almost like he rose from the dead. I think this is what they're alluding to. He basically died or almost died multiple times. He was not functioning,
what
and
was
he
it
came
again
back.
he was addicted to? What was he addicted to?
Clonazepam. I think that's a benzodiazepine. That's a very heavy tranquilizer. This is the kind of stuff that my father was prescribed for decades. And
Is that an opiate or is that it's a psych medicine, isn't
it's
it?
no, it's a tranquilizer. Hang on a second.
Tranquilizer. Okay.
Let me just clonazepam is a benzodiazepine drug used for the acute treatment of panic disorder, epilepsy, and non-convulsive status epilepticus. And
why was he taking it?
he says, and we cannot really verify this. He says that he was on it prescription. It was on that prescription because his wife had cancer, and so in order to unwind,
But he had been
and
on
sleep,
it before his wife's cancer. He'd been on these things for years, hadn't he?
well,
I think.
it's well, the way he tells the story is that his wife had cancer, and hang on, here's the detail, and
Yeah,
it was an
I've heard
expanded.
that
It was
story about it, but I think it was just an increase of something he was already on. I think.
Well, it says that his dosage was increased when his wife had more trouble with cancer, and then he had these problems on it, and he tried to come off and he couldn't come off this dosage that he was on. Now, we're supposed to just believe everything he says about that, but there's so many other possibilities. He might have just taken that recreationally. He might have taken that just to unwind, because he's a busy man. I mean, we're supposed to believe that this was out of grief and stress because of his wife, but there may be more reasons why he would have sought such a prescription. And I don't know the exact dosage he was on, because the stuff is dangerous, it's very addictive, but there are many people on these, and there are many people who go through a detox or some sort of rehab.
What are
Why is
the
his case
withdrawal
special?
side effects? What is it, the side effects that it was so dangerous he had to go to Russia? Do you remember?
Well, basically, it's this stuff works on the central nervous system. It really brings down your system, and it's a state of bliss. It's exactly what he advised his followers against. to take a drug that would cause this artificial bliss. So you don't care about the problems that you have anymore, and you can sleep and you feel like a baby. This is why my father took this stuff. And my father actually pretended he had a heart problem. So he basically had these panic attacks, and he told people he had a heart problem, and his medication was for his heart, but it was really just a state of panic and discomfort. And he got his prescription for some strange reason, because that was the only thing that would make him sleep and calm down. So I don't trust. I mean, there's like this old saying in medical circles: never trust an addict, because you shouldn't trust an addict or a former addict to tell the truth. And so we should be careful when he talks about this stuff, because he blames it on outside factors. You know, the cancer of his wife, and then for some magical reason, he had this huge problem on his prescribed dosage, and then his withdrawal basically killed him multiple times, and he needed to go to a special clinic, and his ordeal was special, and his suffering was special. Everything about it was special, he said. And I have a problem with that story. I mean, there's something does not really
Well,
add up.
you have a very influential conservative who's got this trouble, and the Russians somehow get their hands on him physically.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me. And he comes back from that experience, and he's suddenly ready to give Russia a pass on invading a neighboring country. That's interesting to me.
Here's something. Here's some. Okay, this even gets stranger. It says here, Peterson's health problems first surfaced in September of 2019 when his family announced that he had undergone a stint in rehab in upstate New York. According to Mikhaila's update from Russia, that's his daughter, he was prescribed the sedative clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, by his family doctor in 2017 for anxiety stemming from a severe autoimmune reaction to food. Right, and then he gets on this, what do you call, lion diet, this only meat diet.
Eating well. Now I can tell you that I poisoned myself. Probably what happened. I poisoned myself remodeling my house 10 years ago. I was exposed. I think it was this floor glue, because I developed autoimmune Graves' disease after being exposed to the floor glue. It came on afterwards. And of course, I think that, and what I was told later by a doctor, is that my mast cells were mutated, which meant that then they would go and attack my own body. And it was all kinds of foods would set it off. So I wasn't quite on an all meat diet, but I was eating, I went paleo, right? I could not eat carbs for about 8 years. And then the doctor said, you know what, you're lucky. It looks like your mast cells died off, the mutated ones, and your new ones are not mutated. So I was lucky. I could, you can be stuck with these autoimmune disease, but when you've taken chemicals or you're exposed to chemicals, and I have no idea if his daughter seems to have it and he has it, maybe they were exposed to something that caused mutations in their immune system, because they both him and his daughter have severe food allergies or autoimmune issues with food, to where the only thing they can eat is beef, which is very odd. And I think that his wife has something similar. She's eating maybe chicken. I may be misremembering there, but that's a very serious, for those of us that have been exposed to that, that's a serious thing.
He's not your regular guy. I mean, he's supposed to be an expert on addiction. So when he feels anxiety from food, then he gets a prescription for.
He medicates himself. Yeah.
He gets a prescription for a benzodiazepine, and then
a toxic. By the way, benzodiazepine is a toxic medicine. It's toxic to the liver.
And then he tried to
help you really.
Then he tried to quit the medication cold turkey during the summer of 2019. Why would he do that when he can read the description of this stuff, when he's supposed to be an expert on this stuff?
Don't you wean yourself off of it?
Yeah, you shouldn't quit cold turkey. What was he thinking? Or maybe the story isn't even true. It says that Mikhaila has consistently and emphatically claimed that her father is suffering strictly from physical dependence and not from addiction. And they stress.
The difference?
Well, not there. It's not
What's the
that.
difference
Well,
between addiction and
they
physical
construe one.
dependence?
They certainly construe a difference. They said dependence simply means that a person gets withdrawal symptoms when they stop taking a drug. But the National Institute on Drug Abuse defines addiction as compulsive use despite harmful consequences. It is possible to be dependent on a drug without being addicted to it. Well, it's just splitting hairs. It's just like word games at this point. He had a problem. He had anxiety, and he got on benzos instead of finding another solution. He just went on benzos. He increased the dosage. And then he tried to go cold turkey, and that didn't work. And then he needed a special clinic in Russia with a special method that's not disclosed to get him off of it. I mean, what kind of story is that? I mean, is he that narcissistic that he can't just tell a simple story? I got addicted to the stuff. I wanted to keep it a secret. It is somewhat embarrassing because of my statements about drugs. But yeah, I did some rehab and now I'm off it. Why can't he tell a normal story? Why does it have to be this epic martyr? I almost died. I went through hell. I'm this big hero story. Why does he have to tell a story like this? So this is just strange to me. And then he claims, of course, no, he was not an addict. He was too good and too strong to be an addict. He just had a physical dependency on that. Yeah. So benzos can cause physical dependence within 4 weeks. So they tell us he got on it in 2017, and then he went to rehab in 2019. That's 2 years later. And he tried to quit cold turkey in 2019. So, yeah, we know it's creating an addiction in 4 weeks, and he took it for what, 2 years? It's like something doesn't quite add up with this story. And then it says the state-of-the-art treatment for, in this article here, the state-of-the-art treatment for benzodiazepine dependence is not some grueling ordeal. Patients are not strapped to a hospital bed, white-knuckling it through withdrawal. Instead, they are gradually weaned off the drugs outside the hospital over the course of months. In general, doctors try to decrease a patient's dose by 25% every 2 weeks. High success rate, up to 80-90% of patients have successfully completed detox in these clinics. But Jordan Peterson, he tried to quit cold turkey. What's going on? And
I don't understand.
and of course, his daughter says, that yeah, he had some paradoxical special reactions to this drug. Just this restlessness and whatnot. Michaela told RT, that's Russia Today, the station that can no longer broadcast in the West. Michaela told RT that her father was looking for a place that had the guts to detox him cold turkey, a place where doctors aren't influenced by the pharmaceutical companies. What? So I mean, Western doctors, they can get you off of this stuff, and it's a successful process, and it's not magic. You just wean these people off, and you monitor them. But they go to Russia because they have some special magic going on. I mean, what is that supposed to mean?
Well, it's interesting. In Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, Rule 6 is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Oh, okay.
The West is decadent. It's awful. We should let Russia overrun things. But I went to Russia to be cured of my addiction, and I almost died. Yeah.
Oh boy.
I don't know, but the thing is, I think it's kind of unfair reflection on Carl Jung that Jordan Peterson quotes him. That may be the unfair thing about all this. And I know, that it is. I'm not done with this fascinating book by Richard Knoll, but Peterson's Peterson's use of Jung, maybe like his use of other things, is sort of a pop psychology use
A what?
rather than a pop psychology usage,
What is
right?
that?
Well, that is, there's the popularizers, there's the popularizers, the
Right,
popularizing
right,
of
right. It's
something
it's
that's
a it's
serious.
trend. Yeah,
It's in other words, you're really not understanding Jung or Dostoevsky or Solzhenitsyn when you get the Jordan Peterson short version. And I've listened to Jordan Peterson's short versions before, and thought, well, that's not really it. Um, you actually ought to read those writers. You ought to read Crime and Punishment. You ought to read the Devils, or it's sometimes translated as the Possessed. You ought to read Aeon, or if you were able to read something that difficult, or at least The Undiscovered Self by Jung. Everybody should read some of these works because they are important for our understanding ourselves, whether you agree entirely with them or not. Same reason to read Nietzsche or to read Karl Marx or even Hitler. You need to understand these people and these things and these times. But a popularizer, and I'm guilty of this. I'm a popularizer. I'm writing for people that aren't reading those books. But Peterson is thought to be on this really high level, and that is a problem. Um,
yeah. And
you know,
he wanted to be. I mean, he wanted to be the symbol of masculinity, or he wanted to uh, celebrate masculinity, and he made a big point about that. But when you read his 12 rules for life, I mean, he talks about having been a wimp when he was younger. I mean, he talks about some of these encounters, and of course when it came out that he was on benzodiazepines, and he messed up his rehab strategy and whatnot. It none of it seemed very masculine, and it's something that when at some point when you want to claim that topic, when you want to talk about masculinity in the West and strength in the West, you either have to have a very good grasp of the concept, or you need to live that in some way that is more than just virtue signaling. I mean, people talk about the left virtue signaling. They talk about virtues, and they festoon themselves with these slogans, but it's really hard to measure up to these standards, right? It's easy to talk about morals, it's easy to talk about strength, but it's difficult to come up with that strength day by day by day by day, without some form of cheating or some form of medication or self-medication. And this is sort of a big topic, not just with Jordan Peterson, but with many others. I mean, especially those guys who are pro-Russia. They associate now masculinity itself with Russia, and everything that comes with it. So if you want to be strong and masculine, you got to be with this whole program. But if you oppose Russia, you are one of the. If you really oppose Russia, you're one of these Democrats. You're one of the woke people. You're one of those weak people who are degenerates and who ruin everything. But I mean, does the life of Jordan Peterson seem very masculine to you? I mean, it's like I'm not impressed by his political work at all. And so when I look at something else, when I look at other things, I don't see that he's I see a problem with him claiming the topic of masculinity and then associating that with Russia, essentially. It's almost like the communists who claimed whole concepts like justice, or just fairness, justice. They want to claim terms and they want to claim entire concepts that we're talking about as if they own them, and they are the only ones who can define them. And it's almost like Peterson is using the leftist playbook, and it's also like a right-wing version of the left-wing critical theory, is it not? I mean, what in in critical theory, we talked about this. It's just a form of subversion. You're trying to subvert a society by using specific ways of complaining, whining, being provocative, publicity stunts. And it seems like the entire new right wing, the pro-Russian new right wing, is using sort of their own adapted version of left-wing critical theory. Okay, it seems like I lost your audio signal.
Yeah, I was just muted for a second. It seems like we're in this era where we have comedians doing political commentary, right? And we see this all over the place. This is the kind of thing that is not very good. And so it's all about the popular people, the jazzy people, the entertainers doing the commentary. So how serious is that commentary where people are just entertained? Not very serious, I don't think. And so in a way, you could say that Peterson and all these people who've become super famous, they've done it by being entertainers. And so what is how serious are they? That's the other question. And I think maybe the audience, Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. And Neil Postman with Amusing Ourselves to Death, we are no longer a literate society. It's not about reading. It's not about studying. It's not about knowing things. It's about presentation, right? It's about saying things that grab people in the immediate moment. And maybe the truth is a little bit boring and prosaic, maybe too prosaic now to even compete. Maybe that's the actual situation we're in.
Yeah, but people felt, for example, in late Tsarist Russia, people felt powerless. They were very frustrated, and they felt powerless. And here came communism, promising them a brighter future. And communists, the communists, the moment they had the first bit of power, the moment communists took power in Russia, and that's even before the civil war in Russia. The communists, and even Lenin himself, said that we have to project strength. We have to use every form of brutality. We have to kill, because we have to be seen as strong. And there's no other way but to be seen as strong. Even internally, we have to get rid of anybody who's not loyal to the cause. And so now in the West, there's people who feel powerless, and they're very frustrated. And here comes this new movement, this new right-wing, esoteric, pro-Russian movement, and they promise a better future. And it's like when Peterson is conflating masculinity, and he's conflating it with the Russians and their decision to go to war. It almost becomes like this might makes right. Okay, it's like as long as something looks like a Roman Empire, something claims to be Christian, something claims to be traditional, strength is good. Strength is acceptable, and this is what we have to go for. This is what we go after. And so the crimes of Russia, the evil of Russia, is then redefined as strength. And I think this is the great problem that the new right wing has, because they glorify evil, and they believe it is strength, because they believe they're fighting this other enemy.
You think that MAGA does this?
Well, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not knowledgeable enough when it comes to politics in the other empires. I mean, Donald Trump was occupied with casinos and real estate and beauty contests and that sort of thing. But when it comes to Putin, I mean, in the Tucker interview, Putin talked about the 1,000-year anniversary of the Russian Empire in 1862, and he was all about projecting that strength. I mean, we know he has a tremor in his hand, he has restless feet, and that sort of thing. But Putin wanted to project strength. He is not fazed by the sanctions. He's not fazed by weapons deliveries. He threatens nuclear weapons, and he gives the interview to Tucker Carlson in the Kremlin palace. So it's all about projecting that image of strength, and I think Jordan Peterson is not giving his audience a clear enough understanding. You know, when exactly is strength evil, and when can somebody who is degenerate, or a system that is degenerate, when can it appear very strong? And self-marketing. You know, I mean, where is the line? Where is the line for Jordan Peterson? At what point will he abandon Russia? At what point will Jordan Peterson say that's enough? I've reached my limit. I'm out of this. Is there even such a point? Because we've seen this over and over again. You know, that people did not have a red line. You know, they accepted the gulags. They accepted the political cleansing in the Soviet Union. They accepted the wars in Korea and Vietnam. They accepted everything. And they even would have accepted a nuclear attack by the Soviet Union, because they have no line. So I think the question would be to Jordan Peterson and his followers, where is that line? At what point would you not accept Russia? I mean, even in its day-to-day evil, even when it's like these poor Russian girls that they find in these remote villages, and they take the prettiest girls and they ship them, you know, to the cities, to these rich customers, these powerful people. It's like what Jeffrey Epstein did is just a common Tuesday in Russia. I mean, there's so many of these Epstein-type characters in Russia. It's a common occurrence, you know, and you can't point at Jeffrey Epstein and say the West is degenerate, we need the Russians, when you ignore all the knowledge and the data we have on human trafficking in Russia. I mean, it's not just Ukraine, and it's not just 1, 2, 3 other things. It's so many things that really tell
Russia
us.
was the heroin capital of the world, where it had the most heroin addiction, and they were trafficking all that heroin from Afghanistan. And of course, this goes back to the Soviet Union, where they were trying to pump the West full of heroin and ended up contaminating themselves.
Yeah, and like Russia. I mean, I said this when we talked about the Tucker interview with Putin. Putin's grand empire of 1,000+ years has been literally dying for decades. It's an empire that is literally dying. The people don't want to have babies, even when the government pays them a bunch of money for it. There's quite a lot of Muslim migration that people don't want to acknowledge outside of Russia. A lot of Muslim migration. Lots of demographic problems, lots of AIDS. Many people don't know that. There's a staggering, alarming number of AIDS cases in Russia.
Well, when you get a lot of intravenous drug users, you get AIDS that comes along with that.
Yeah, and it's like the alcoholism, the rampant alcoholism. I mean, it's like when Jordan Peterson talks about this in his book, these 12 rules for life. You should face reality. You should face your pain, not numb yourselves with alcohol and stupid stuff. Look at what the average Russians are doing this. They're drinking like crazy. Yeah. They just want to get through their day. And there's so many examples. And the domestic violence. You know, this is not like some people in the West, not like some people in the West interpret this, that you have a strong patriarchy in Russia and it's very Christian and the man is sort of running the household and everything's idyllic. No, it's like these alcoholics in Russia. They beat their women. Sometimes they beat their women to death. They beat their children. They abuse their children. And sometimes these children run away. And then it's just they're sniffing glue on the outskirts of Moscow. I mean, it's like, this is degeneracy. and it's everywhere in Russia. So why is Jordan Peterson failing at a baseline level?
And the average the abortion rate in Russia is higher than in the U.S.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
not.
and the church attendance. I mean, their church
Yeah,
attendance on Easter is about 4%. I think it's down to 3 or 2% now, but before the pandemic, it was 4%. Well, church attendance on Easter in the United States is around 10 times that.
yeah,
You know,
and it's so
so
it's not
what are they
just
talking
Ukraine.
about?
It's not just Ukraine, and at some point, people would just run out of excuses to blame everybody else for Russia's problem. So you can blame the West for, Russia attacking Ukraine. You can try that till you're blue in the face. But what about these 500 other existential problems that Russia has? You can't just blame everybody else for it. You can blame Western globalists for it, whatever that's supposed to mean. And so what is Jordan Peterson's goal? What is his positive utopian view on the future? What does he actually want to see, and how realistic is that view? I mean, they used to call it Pax Romana. It's the Roman concept of peace. Once you don't have enemies anymore, once you have, especially not internal enemies, when you control the territory, you have this sort of rule established, and then you have it's more quiet. It's a quiet phase of the empire, and this is called Pax Romana. I mean, is that what Peterson is looking for? Because that's a very old concept. I mean, that's been around for millennia.
Yeah, I don't think Peterson is looking for that. I think that it's something different. I think that with Peterson, I think that he sees a lot of people on the right, they see the enemy as this political correctness, as wokeism. And that's what they're confronted with. That's what they're having to deal with. And of course, Peterson was confronted with this at the university that he worked at. And people literally get their careers destroyed. They get destroyed by that. So in a way, the internal enemy, the left, becomes the main enemy. And anybody outside the society that seems to be at odds with these woke people are obviously allies. And I think that's maybe, but that's very simplistic thinking. The enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend. He could be, but maybe he's just another enemy that helps set up the other enemy, which is what it actually the case is in this situation.
Yeah, and it's like when you quote old stuff from Carl Gustav Jung, or when you mention some of these concepts and you throw around some of these phrases, I mean, it's sort of like an easy way to appear very intelligent and to appear very knowledge. It's like people can emulate this. They just copy what Jordan Peterson does, and they just repeat some of these phrases, and they appear like they are knowledge, and they have answers to all these questions. But when it comes down to, okay, so what's the plan? What's the actual plan? It's just a very broad concept of we need tradition, and we need
Make your bed.
Exactly,
Right?
make
That's
your
what
bed.
Peterson
What
says.
was it? What was the
Make
other
your
thing?
bed.
Play with a stray cat and
Yeah.
buy a
Don't
skateboard.
mess with skateboarders, I
Don't
think, is
don't
another
mess
one.
with skateboarders and things. It's like wait a minute, you're supposed to be this sage. You're supposed to be this shaman of mystical powers, and then you're giving me this 1910 conservative talking points from Europe,
Hmm.
that were around back then. Uh,
Yeah.
it's just not going to do it. I mean, we're facing some very sophisticated empires with very sophisticated intelligence capabilities, and these Russian intelligence services, they have some of the best shrinks in the world. I mean, shrinks that are better suited for these things than Jordan
Well,
Peterson.
they're going after people like they're shrinks that are going after people like Peterson to turn
Yeah,
them into agents of influence.
yeah, and so it's
It's
this. I
more
always tell
practical
people. I always
military psychology.
every time somebody says to me, "Well, you don't need books. I don't need books. It's not necessary. It's silly." It's just like school, it's just annoying. And every time somebody says that, I reply with, you are dealing with some very sophisticated empires, and they employ the smartest people they can find. So you're going up against some people that have 150 IQ. And they have more than 1,000 years of experience in running an empire. So these are the people you're going up against. So don't think for a minute you can just toss around some slogans like a magic spell to
Mhm.
to fade to
Especially if you crib the slogan from the enemy and not without even realizing it. You're really a silly person. Anyway, well, we've been going for 3 hours now or more. We better stop. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm Jeff Nyquist in the United States. This has been Friends and Enemies, and it's been Alex. Been nice to be with Alex Benesch in Germany, and I hope you'll join us again in the future. Thank you.